Well, hello, folks. It is your friend Kyle, and it is another episode of the Remodelers on the Rise show. I was telling my guest today that typically when I'm doing these interviews, I don't really feel many butterflies or any nerves. But today, I was kind of like, I woke up thinking about it this morning, Steve. I was like, oh, I'm interviewing Steve today, and I want it to go well, and I want it to be nice. You had me all worked up.
I'm sorry about that, Kyle. What did I do to
Yeah.
bother you?
Nothing other than I think I want to seek your approving attitude and head nodding towards me. So what's interesting about my guest today, his name is Steve Ezikian, and he is a dear friend of mine for I don't know, goes back 10, 12, 14 something years
At
now.
least that, yeah.
And Steve and I, at least that, yeah. Steve and I got to know each other at church. We're in a weekly Bible study together. We're just really good friends. And as Steve is kind of transitioning from his full, complete career into the next chapter of things, he is starting to venture out and think about how can I help business people? How can I help individuals improve in a variety of areas? And him and I were talking, and I said, Steve, one area that remodelers, my audience, has room for improvement in. We'll just say it politely like that, is in the skill of interviewing candidates. It is something that as business people is very important. We know that not hiring the right person is very frustrating and very costly. And when it comes to interviewing, it's one of those things that a lot of times business owners don't do it very often, and we kind of take a little bit of a haphazard approach to it. We don't have a process-driven approach to it. And Steve is very talented and has a lot of experience in this area of interviewing. So that's what we're going to talk about today: how to make sure that you are interviewing well and professionally, so that you get the result that you're looking for. So, Steve, there's a little introduction to things, and I would love it if you could just introduce yourself to the people. If you want to say something lovely and nice about me, that's fine as well. And then we'll get into this topic.
Well, I'll start with something lovely about Kyle. Kyle's a great guy and extremely
Oh,
talented and a lot of fun to be with. And he makes our meetings, our Bible studies, really interesting and
hmm.
enlightening. But kind
Okay.
of
That's
find,
that's
yeah.
enough. I know we
So
could.
nothing about
I
me
know we
then?
could spend the whole 30 minutes. No, I did. You know, we could spend the whole 30 minutes. I just wanted to cut you off there. That's enough about me. Tell them about you, Steve.
So Steve Ezikian, I've just ended a 40-year career that included work as a public accountant and consultant, and then in school administration, where I ended up being the chief operating officer for an organization called Wayne County Regional Educational Service Agency that provides services, purchasing, consulting, technology administration, technology applications, oversight to the all the schools in Wayne County. And in all my career, from the time I was a CPA to now, one of my responsibilities included recruiting and HR functions or an oversight over HR functions. And interviewing has been something that I have kind of honed in over the years and learned
Hmm.
to be particular about. I'll say that word, particular about.
Hmm. I like that. I like that. And if you were to, before we kind of get into maybe some of your best practices on how you approach interviewing, I mentioned a little bit the importance of interviewing and doing it right. How often have you seen it where we're a little haphazard with our interviewing, or we're seeing signs that this person might not be a great fit, and when we hire somebody that's not the right fit, that ripple effect can be lasting and difficult.
Yeah, especially when you're dealing in employment law, because once you hire somebody, it's really difficult to get rid of somebody. So it's really important to
Hmm.
making sure that investment is the right investment. And for a lot of you, as it was for me, when you hire somebody, you're putting a lot of investment in training into that person, and that's costly. You want to make sure you're making the right decisions along the way.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Cool. So why don't we start? We'll kind of walk through the interview process. Before we even set up a time for an interview, or as we're starting to say, okay, we need to hire for this position. How should remodelers, how should business people, kind of start with this process?
Well, you want to start with deciding what you're hiring for and that kind of goes into a job description. And really think about what
Hmm.
skills, what qualities you want in that person that you're hiring, that you include that in the job description. So number one, the people looking at the job know what you're looking for, and number two, you can use that job description to be the basis of your evaluation of any candidate. So be really clear about
Hmm.
the skills you want, the character of a person you want, the kind of worker you want, how they're going to, what indicators will they be that they'll fit in your organization? They may be the best carpenter in the world or the best electrician in the world, but are they going to fit in your organization? So how are you going to
Hmm.
quantify that? How are you going to gauge that in the interview process? So those things need to be part of the job description so you can feed off that to ask the right questions and make sure that you're getting the answers you want.
Hmm. So I think sometimes when I think of a job description, I'm like, ugh, can't we just put kind of just some generic stuff up there? We're looking for a lead carpenter. They need this many years of experience. They need this and that. But I think we probably need to look at that job description a little bit more intently to make
Yeah.
sure that it's really starting to tell a little bit of the story of what, and the word that you use there of, what kind of character of the person are you looking for? I was thinking about that of having that in the job description is interesting. When you
When I
think
when I
about character, like how would you incorporate? Go ahead.
Yeah, so for example, when I write job descriptions, I break up into categories. So you might have things like, what is their experience, what is their education, and then an area about qualifications. And in the qualifications, you list the technical things and the character things. So on the character side, maybe you want to look at their ability um, to get along with other people in your organization and the customer base. So you would list something like not just experience in good relationships with customers, but use the word demonstrated experience about good relationships with
Hmm.
customers because you want them to be able to talk about their experience. If I say to you, Kyle, do you know how to use Excel? Give me an answer. Do you know
I
how to
do,
use Excel?
Steve. Some
Kyle,
might call me some might call me an Excel wizard.
so here's the better way to ask that question. Kyle, can you demonstrate to me the highest level of Excel worksheet that you've developed in your work?
Ooh,
Got it? So it's true. It's
I
you're
like that.
still
I
yeah.
like
So
that. Yeah.
you're digging a little bit deeper. You're making that person demonstrate that they have the skill or ability.
Hmm. So even right there, just I'm always looking for little nuggets that if there's people that watch the video version of this, and there's people that are listening to the audio version of the podcast, and I'm always kind of pausing when I hear kind of a nugget right there. That's an interesting nugget, and what you kind of did was you didn't say we're looking for somebody that demonstrates or that can do this. You use the phrase demonstrated. It has happened. They have done this before. So
Right.
even going into your current job descriptions and looking for a little bit more of that past tense now when we're sitting in front, just like our job description said, we're looking for somebody who has demonstrated the ability to do the following. Talk to me about a story. Tell me an example of how you've
Exactly.
done that. It's a slight tweak, but an important one.
So for one of the things I always talk about in my interviews is how well do they work in a team. So a question always comes out like this: Tell, think of an experience where you were part of a team. Can you tell me about what the project was and what your role on the team was, and how did that project go? Okay, so they're going to talk
Hmm.
to you about some project that they worked on with other people, and they're going to say they might not understand what your role on the team was. They may say, "Well, I was the project manager." But that's really not the question. The question is, how did you interact in the team? Were you a note taker? Were you the facilitator? Were you the person that
Hmm.
was task oriented? What was your role as a part of that team? And then the follow up question to that is, okay, what conflict occurred when you were part of that team, and how did it get resolved, and what was your role in resolving it?
Hmm. Interesting. So do you feel like, and I think one thing to also when you're asking deeper questions there, that's something to evaluate. If you do an interview and you've just kind of gone through surface questions, or you realize, man, they were really short and abbreviated with all of their answers, you're probably asking a lot of closed questions. But even what you just described, you're really asking them to think and engage with things. And sometimes even just giving them, you don't have to rush with it, but just think about that. And then
Yeah,
go ahead and as you think about it, go ahead and give me your answer. I think sometimes when we're interviewing, especially with a deeper question like that, we can rush through it too often.
absolutely. One of the most important things to
That's
do as
good.
an interview, one of the most important things to do as an interviewer is to listen. You're listening to give them
Mm,
time to respond. There can be, it's okay for there to be some silence and let them think. Okay. There's okay for silence and let them
mm,
think. And then also you're listening for some maybe keywords or key phrases. And if they don't answer with those keywords or key phrases, then you might want to ask a prompting question underneath. If you think they have the skill, if you think they have the ability, but they're just not getting it in how you phrase the question, it's okay. Ask another question that's related to it. When I develop my interview questions, I have a rubric next to them, and it's like 1 to 4. Four being they gave me the best answer I could have gotten in it, and that answer included these 4 elements. Okay, and one being
mm,
they didn't nail it at all. Um, so that I can, as I'm interviewing a person, I can check off on question 1 they hit a 4, and maybe write some notes. On question 2 they hit a 2 on the rubric and maybe write some notes, and that gives me a reference sheet when we're all done. In my day, there will be days when I interview 12 different candidates for the same job, and it's hard to remember candidate one
mm.
when you're done with candidate 12, right? So it gives you some reference
Yeah,
points to look
yeah.
back at when you're evaluating.
Mm. So the before the interview, where you went with that is, let's be thoughtful with our job description. You kind of gave a little bit of an outline of what that looks like, and also kind of a way that everybody needs to go to their job descriptions that they have and say, all right, can I tweak the wording of this that will help me during the interview process? And then you started talking about just some of the questions and approach that you take. I want to get into a few more of the questions because I got a feeling you've got a few more of them, but talk to me about maybe still before the interview starts. Is there anything that you'd like to do, in the day or two before? Is it a best practice, do you think, to remind people of what's coming up? Anything? Do you ever have people prep things ahead of time, give them a little bit of homework to do? Anything else that you do before the interview? And then maybe also just kind of share, how do you start a lot of your interviews?
Sure. So let me kind of go in order. You decide you have a job opening. You decide the skills and qualifications you want for the job opening. So you take the time to write a careful job description. Based on that job description, you develop your questions. You decide what the good answers to those questions are, and maybe develop that rubric. If you're going to have an interview team, um, in my practice, because I worked in the public sector, I did not share the questions with the interview team ahead of time because I didn't want them to get out. But you can
Hmm.
decide if you want to share those questions or not. But it's really important though for you to do 2 things with your interview team. Um, if you are going to be the decision maker, you need to let the team know that they're there for input and to be eyes on the process, and they're going to give you feedback, and you're going to make a decision. If not, then it'll be more democratic. And the other thing is you want them to understand what you're looking for in the position for the person who's going to be best candidate for that position, so they understand your mindset
Hmm.
on that. So they should get that ahead of time. Depending on the position, you may want to have them do a demonstration, have them doing a writing project, um, um, have them teach you something in the interview. We've done that a lot of times where you give them a project or a topic, and they'll develop a 5 minute presentation. And you just want to see how they handle themselves in front of an audience. You want to see what kind of materials they use, how do they interact with technology as part of a
Hmm.
presentation. Um, see, are they comfortable with eye contact? Can they answer questions on the fly? Things like that. That obviously depends on the position. If it's a technical position in your
Yeah.
field, um, that's up to you whether you want to see them actually do carpentry or not. But probably you can get
Yep.
that back on their background. But if it's a kind of a sales position, you might want them to sell you something. You know, in a
Hmm.
short presentation.
Or yeah, or I mean, an estimator. How do you specifically think through a project? A
Right.
designer. How what questions would you pretend that I'm the homeowner. You're just so that idea of having them do some of the work that they're going to do, or even as a lead carpenter, somebody who is the point person between the client and the company. Let's say this problem came up. How would you communicate with the client that the project's going to be delayed 4 days? Here's the situation. How do you approach that with the client? What do
Yeah.
you share? So the demonstrating, and then also for the remodelers listening to it, I'm thinking of Tony Bonnet with Mactown Construction. I think I have his hat. Well, there's his hat right there. It's not even too deep. Thanks for the hat, Mactown Construction. By the way, remodelers who are listening to this, you probably know this by now. I love hats. Steve, do you have a hat for your new consulting firm that you can share with me?
Not yet, but you can help me design it, Kyle.
Okay. Okay, Bailey can help you with that, but yes, we can help you design it. But what Tony does is he does have a hands-on interview section of things. They know it ahead of time. They bring some tools, and he's got a little setup in his shop of trim this out, install and hang this door. And what is, yes, you can find out from their years of experience and they're talking, but oh man, when they actually have to put the tools on and do a little project, it either confirms everything you are thinking about them, or all of a sudden you go, they're not quite what they presented. So I love the idea of more demonstration and working that in. Another little resource that I wanted to give: if you go, if you're a remodeler, if you go to Remodelers with an S, Remodelers Vault. VAULT.com. We have a section in there under team where there's some really good interview questions that a remodeler could ask the various positions. So be sure to go to remodelersvault.com and you can get access to that. It's free of charge. Very generous of us, huh, Steve?
Very nice. The other thing in prep, Kyle, if
Yes.
you've got a lot of candidates for a position, you may not want to take the time to do a full interview. So it's perfectly appropriate and
Mm,
good to do a 5-minute phone screening. Get two or three really key questions that'll tell you whether or not you want to move that person forward, and do a phone screening, um, and then schedule the interviews after that.
gotcha.
And it's also
And
appropriate.
I think sometimes, go ahead,
It's
please.
also appropriate to do more than one interview. You got can't. It's very
Yes.
common for us to do interview. Like I said, we interview 12 candidates a day, narrow that down to three, and have a second interview. And that second interview may be where we do the demonstration or the presentation, for those people that we really are interested in.
Yeah. So I'm hearing several best practices. One, remodelers listening to this, what you're kind of piecing together and seeing here is, do you have a process for interviewing? We're talking about a lot of best practices, and one idea, you don't have to do it this way, but you certainly could. It is really nice for you to have a candidate, to give them a little something to fill out or to complete, and then to be able to easily say the next step in our process is a 5 to 10 minute just phone interview or quick Zoom interview, and we just have a couple questions for you just to get to know you a little bit. And then the next step after that is our in person interview with myself and two other team members. Just by being able to say very clearly step one, step two, three, that is something that you need to decide and do. I think a lot of times a good candidate comes in and it's like, well, let's set up an in-person interview. Very lackadaisical. And then we sit down and we're kind of sort of prepared, but we don't really have a thoughtful process of questions like Steve's going through here to prepare. So just like I'm talking in every area of your modeling business, process, 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 you're hearing the makings of a nice process when it comes to interviewing. Be very thoughtful and purposeful with it.
What
Excellent.
also is very
Excellent.
important about that process, Kyle, is that your ability to demonstrate that you have a process in this in your hiring. It tells that
Mm,
candidate that you're on the ball and you're interested in them. So not only do you have that process for yourself internally, you're gonna articulate that process to the candidate so they know what to expect and can anticipate
yeah.
when you're going to follow up with them. You don't want to lose sight of those candidates that you're really interested in, especially in this market, right?
Yeah. And I think, as much as we'd like to think, well, they're applying to be with us, obviously they're desperate to work with us. Chances are they're talking to a few other companies. Chances are
Absolutely.
they're interviewing us just as much as we're interviewing them. And when you think about why people are leaving their jobs, there's a lot of different studies on it. But one of the top reasons people are leaving their jobs and looking for another place is it has a lot to do with the leadership that they were under. These people aren't organized. It's always last minute. I just don't feel confident that they really have their business under control. I got laid off for 3 days because they didn't have work lined up. They are interviewing us just as much. And when we put our best foot forward, when we're excited, when they see our process, when they see us listening, that plays a big factor in their desire to say yes if we so off if we actually offer the position. Excellent. Steve, you hit on several different questions. What's one or two other of your favorite kind of questions during an interview?
Well, I always start out with an interview with introductions, explanation of our process and when they will hear back from us. And then the first interview is
Mm,
usually around, "Okay, tell me about your work experience. Take me through the last 10 or 15 years of your work experience. Why did you take each job? What did you do at that job? And why did you leave that job?" Okay. And let them go through that history so you can get a feel for their work experience and make sure it matches their resume. If there are gaps, ask about why there are gaps. It's perfectly legitimate to ask about
mm,
the gaps. Um, and then if you feel like there's some something that you really don't understand about why a person left, dig deeper into that why they left. There's all kinds of reasons why people leave jobs, and sometimes people get fired. And sometimes that's okay, depending on the circumstances.
mm.
But you need to know what the circumstances are.
Yeah.
It's important to see then at that time too, who did they include as references of those jobs and who they didn't, and that helps you ask questions more deeply
Mm,
about those that they didn't. Okay. Another question I always ask is obviously why do they want this position and where do they see themselves fitting into the organization, not only today but in 10 years, to see what their
mm,
kind of trajectory is another question to ask. And then also very
mm,
important is to leave time for them to ask you questions. That does a couple things. It demonstrates how deeply they've done some homework about your organization, and also demonstrates how deeply they understand the work. One more.
mm,
Um, but going back to the job description, pull it out, show that to them. You've seen our job description, and it's got all these qualifications in it and responsibilities. Tell me about two things on here that make you nervous, and let them
mm,
talk about that. And then follow up with, how will you build up your skills in those areas? Because not everybody's going to have everything on your job description, right? And that's okay.
mhm,
But you want them to be honest about it, and then talk about, so how are you going to build up your skills in this area, or in previous jobs when you didn't have a fully developed skill set in a certain area, how did you pursue learning that skill area?
woo, woo. You guys might want to rewind this about 2.5 minutes and just jot each of those down. Yes, open up with work experience, ask them about gaps. That's perfectly fine. Why do they want this position? Where do they see themselves fitting in? Man, you can learn a lot about that. And you can start to learn about, did they actually research us? So many remodelers, you click on their website and they have a wonderful little our team page. People do business with people they know. So we'd love to have an our team page on our website because it helps build know, like, and trust. Have they looked at that? Have they seen that? Have they researched that? Um, you know, Going through the job description and say, two things that make you nervous. That's not. It's a pointed question. It's a very thoughtful question, and it's not just saying, well, what's your biggest weakness? That tried and true kind of lame question. It's a more thoughtful way of seeing if they have any self reflection on what they're really good at and maybe what they struggle with. I like that a lot. And then if we're not thoughtful, we're not going to remember to leave time for questions at the end. And you can learn a lot about a candidate. If they don't have any questions at the end of the interview, I'm circling that. I'm going, how, really? Really? Thinking to myself, you've got to have some questions here. You also took it another level and said, hey, they give references, and I think sometimes we look at references as, well, people are just going to put people down that they really like. Yeah, but you did some cross checking. They worked there for 10 years. They just told me a story about why they left, and it was on good terms. Yet that person's not on the reference sheet. Interesting.
Yeah,
It's
you should you should
part of what you're evaluating.
yeah, you should be getting not only personal references but professional references. If you don't have professional references,
Yeah.
you should ask for them.
Hmm. And then I have one more question of during the interview. We just gave a lot of good items on that, but something that and it's probably my style, but I think it's a lot of people is man, a culture fit, a good fit with my other team members is just so incredibly important in a remodeling business, in any business really. But we're it's challenging. Of man, I'd like to get to know this person. Like, what makes them tick? What do they like to do outside of work? What's their are they married? Do they have kids? Like, what they have, little kids, older kids? How personal are we able to get when it comes to just getting to know the person outside of work? And how do you kind of crack that shell if it's a challenge?
So in my work, questions about whether you're married, whether you have kids, their health, were not allowed in the interview process,
Yeah,
and I would steer clear from that just from an ethical viewpoint because you don't want to be accused of passing on somebody for
sure.
non-professional reasons, right? But
Yeah,
here's a few things that I do when I want to get to know the person better. I look at their resume. A lot of times when you look at a person's resume and they have some post high school education and it has nothing to do with the work they're doing now. I see on your resume that you went to college to be a teacher. So tell me about that swerve. What led you to do that? And that gives you some insight in terms of maybe who they are as a
mm,
person. And if they include personal stuff on their resume, you feel free to ask about the personal stuff on their resume. Um, if you weren't an electrician, what would you do for a living? And just to hear what they have
mm,
to say. If I visited your last job and just kind of walked around the site and mentioned your name, what would people tell me about you? And you'll
whew,
get some really you'll get some really nice things. Oh, I was a hard worker. I was
yeah.
friendly. But then you would say, okay, if I was on a job site, I found that one person who didn't like Kyle. Why didn't they like Kyle?
Mm,
Yeah,
that's good. I hope they're still. If you're listening to this and you're driving around, you better pull over, because if you're writing all these down, that's not safe to drive and write them down. But luckily, this is recorded. Very interesting. Can you ask a question? Do you think it's appropriate to ask a question? Obviously, you're coming from a little bit more formal, public. We need to be careful.
yeah,
Government type position. But can I say, what do you love to do outside of work?
yeah.
Is that too
That's
personal?
absolutely fine. That's absolutely fine.
Okay.
Just to get to know who they are and what they do. That's absolutely fine. Another thing to think about too
Yeah.
is to think about um, the requirements of the job. If they're going to need to be working on weekends and evenings, is there anything that's going to preclude you from occasionally working on a Saturday? Is there anything that's going to preclude you
Yeah.
from occasionally working overtime? Um,
Right. That's
for,
kind of a
for
gateway into understanding
yeah.
their normal schedule.
Then also for the trade, I don't know if you have. I don't know if people have. If you have an application process before you start interviews, but if there are rest- issues around being able to lift certain amounts of weight or endure
Sure.
certain amounts of noise or things like that, those should be part of the embedded either in the job description or somewhere where they know that they have to be able to lift 50 pounds routinely, or they have to be
Hmm.
able to be in a loud environment routinely for a couple of reasons. You want them to understand what they're getting into. But the second reason is if you end up hiring them and they can't do the 50 pounds, they have full notice and you can terminate, right?
Yeah. What I've loved about what we've covered so far is it's all very fresh. What I'm hearing, even just in the questions that you're asking and kind of the route you're taking to get there, there's a little bit more depth than what I think a lot of us, myself included, kind of think about when we're interviewing. Very kind of some crafty and some interesting ways to dig under the surface to really get more of the open answers and a little bit more depth of who this person is and what their experience is.
Yeah.
So that's been wonderful. So we've got the interview process. We have a candidate that we're pretty pleased with, that we think might be a good fit. Certainly, just based on the situation, based on how many people you had interviewing that person, you may decide to do another interview. There is that whole, hire slow, fire fast mentality. And for sure, the hiring slow, I think too often we're like, well, my gut's saying it feels pretty good. I think this guy's pretty good. I think, yeah, let's hire him. And we need to do our due diligence of, yes, we need to do a background check and run through that. We need to call references. We need to check the boxes, and not just rush to making an offer. So a couple rapid fire questions, Steve. One is, what is a question or two that makes those reference calls kind of worth it versus, well, they're just going to say really nice things. So what's a best practice on those reference calls? Um, and then number two is kind of, when you've decided that this is a good candidate and it's kind of after the interview, what are a few things that you do to, kind of put your best foot forward after the interview is done? So kind of the references and then the after.
Sure. So on references, if you call for a reference and all you get is, yeah, Tom Jones was employed with us from December 2015 through June of 2016. Thank you very much. You know something bad happened, and you can may
Okay.
want to go back to the candidate if you're really interested and see what's happened. So the reference calls, you want to verify the employment, the term of the employment, and the positions the person held. But then you need to get specific based on your interviews and where you may have had concerns or questions through the interview process about the
Mm.
person, to verify that with the previous employer or the person that you're doing the reference
So can I
for.
ask,
So,
problem, their ability to handle conflict, problem
yep,
solving? Can I get
absolutely.
specific like that? Okay.
Absolutely. If anything was maybe not a red flag, but a pink flag in the interview process, make that part of your reference check to just give you confidence in moving
Hmm.
into the next step. You know,
Tell me,
there's
Steve, I've always called those yellow flags. If Okay, it's not a red flag, but you've got some concerns. I've always called it yellow flags, but you're probably correct. It's more of a pink flag, isn't it?
yeah, yeah. I think it's more of a pink
I
flag.
might have to change that.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
not a caution; it's a
All right.
wonder.
So you can dig into Yes.
Yeah,
So you
definitely.
can dig into those things. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Good.
So be specific based on the candidate. For the reference process, let the candidate. I always let the candidates know that we're interested in, that we are going to be pursuing your references, um, before we actually do that. And if they haven't provided enough references, or if you would like a reference from a employer that they didn't provide, ask for it. That's always good, could be interesting information
Okay.
just in that asking process. If you're really interested in the candidate, keep them involved in the process. Send them an email once a day or every other day and let them know where you're at with it, because you don't want to lose them, right? Make sure at some point,
Mm,
if you're really interested in them, that they understand what compensation looks like and what you're offering them, so that you're not wasting your time, quite frankly. Um, I've
mm.
had a lot of candidates that we spent time on, and once they really understood the full compensation package, they weren't interested anymore. So that was a mistake
Gotcha.
early on. So when I get through the first interview process, before I bring somebody to the second interview, if I'm really interested in them, I I take the time to make a phone call and say, we're interested in you. We want to move you forward in the process. This is what that process will look like. By the way, here's the compensation package, and the compensation includes not only pay but benefits, time off, etc. Whatever you're
Mm,
doing in your organization, just so they understand what they're getting into before you invest the time in the next step in the process.
mm.
And then,
And so even that again, go ahead. Go ahead.
I would just say timely communications are key.
Hmm. So we're hearing process, process, process. That the compensation conversation. You may have touched on it before, but what you said there, which I think was wise, is, okay, the interview one's done. Before we move into reference interview two, I call them and say, hey, we're interested. We're pursuing the references, and here's the next step in the process. But I also just want to have just a frank and open discussion on compensation and what we're able to do there to make sure that that's a good fit. I like
Right.
just being very clear with that. And I also like kind of where you put that in the overall process. And then what you were hinting at is keep them involved once a day, every other day. One thing that I'm teaching, I'm always talking about with remodelers is time kills deals. Time kills deals. And the longer it takes on the remodeling side, on the sales side, the longer it takes for us to get that design back to them, longer it takes for us to get the selections process done and get to
Yeah.
the contract signing. Each day that goes by, there's a little bit less likelihood that they're going to move forward. Time kills deals. And it's very similar on the recruiting side. From the moment that you're posting a job, you better be ready to be quick and timely with your process throughout. I have heard too many stories of somebody that is desperate to hire, and because they're desperate to hire, they're very busy, and because they're very busy, a candidate that's really sharp sits there for 3 days, 4 days untouched. We have to make it a priority that when we start this process and when we go through the interviews, that we are timely. Put yourself in their shoes. You had a great interview and you are eager to hear about the next step. You're eager to hear what they think of you. Don't let what should be one day turn into 3 days. Make sure that we're timely, 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 and also bring some energy to it. Bring some excitement to it.
Absolutely.
Let them know that you are excited. They are talking to their spouse or significant other or family member about this opportunity. Your tone of your excitement about them will play a factor in their willingness to come on board with
Yeah.
you. So
I will.
just that
I will.
energy level is
Yeah.
important as well.
That's a really good point, Guy. I will confess that I always start interviews in a very stoic way, and a
Hmm.
non. I don't give myself away, but by the end of the interview, if I'm interested in a person, I'm engaging in banter. I'm I'm
They'll
feeding their
know.
ego.
Hmm.
I'm trying to build them up because I want them to know that we're interested in them and that we're a fun place to work, right? So if
Yeah.
I'm not interested in the person, that doesn't happen.
Yeah, they'll have that hint and they'll have that hunch, and
Yeah,
then kind of as we kind of wrap up here shortly, and as we kind of are wrapping up thinking through the interview process, an area that I see that a lot of my clients over the years haven't done a great job of is actually writing up a more formal offer letter. A lot of times we're verbally sharing this benefit or we're verbally sharing kind of what we're going to pay them, and we're not making it formal. And by formal, I don't mean super long, but what I do mean is everything is spelled out. If there is a simple IRA with a company match, if there's paid holidays, if there's a tool allowance, if there's a uniform allowance, every benefit that you can think of, you need to have that bullet pointed out. They are going to not remember that one or not remember that one. And sometimes they're comparing your offer to something else they have, or they're deciding to stay with their current employer instead of making the leap of faith, which it's risky sometimes to
yes,
jump into something that looks good but that's unknown. Make sure that you have a really strong offer letter and also talk about why it is wonderful to work here. Maybe there's a quote or two from employees of yours that are happy about it, that are happy to work there, that have been there for a long time. Make sure that offer letter is a great selling tool of why they should join you. Anything to add to that offer letter part?
yeah. I think you've gave some really good advice, and really a lot of that is kind of a form letter that you've got in the drawer that you're just going to repeat for a lot of people. But it's a great tool. Again, it keeps them informed. You're going to give them opportunities to ask
Yep.
questions again on there, and then you're going to ask them to accept that letter, and they're going to sign the acceptance and
Yep.
send that back to you, so you know that they understand the terms of it. You need to decide ahead of time, by
Yep.
the way, that if they're not going to accept your compensation level, are you willing to negotiate? So before you send that
Mm.
offer letter out, you make that decision in your head. And if it's somebody you're really interested in, and you know you're balling it, then don't play games. Don't lowball it.
Mm.
Because that if you have to go back and forth, then that's gonna decrease the amount of confidence the person has in coming with your
Yeah.
company. But also just know ahead of time whether you're willing to negotiate. Based on the person's background and experience, you're going to offer this level, but you might go up to, you know, level Y might go up to level Z. Just know that ahead of time, so it
Yeah.
saves you time in the process.
Excellent. Well, I knew this was going to be solid, Steve, but it was extra solid. That was great, great, great. Um,
Good.
very thoughtful stuff. The way kind of like to would kind of like to wrap things up. You can share more wonderful things about me for everybody listening, or you can pass on that. Um, but the main thing that I want you to share, and I'll share as well, if they heard nothing else in what we discussed here, what is something that you would kind of go back and emphasize? Hey, if you took anything away from this podcast, this conversation, make sure you heard fill in the blank. Once you go ahead and share that answer, I'm going to share that answer, and then I'm going to tell folks how they can get a hold of you if they would like a little coaching or a little more conversation on this topic, or maybe help developing that process. So if
Absolutely.
there's anything else, anything that they could take, what comes to your mind for that?
I think it's hard to pick one, but I think the most important thing is that job description. Know what you're hiring and what you're looking
Hmm.
for.
Hmm. And was there anything else that you had prepped or had written down that you really wanted to share that I didn't ask you about?
I think we covered it all, Kyle, and then some. So I think you did a good
Excellent,
job.
excellent. Excellent. And I would say the thing, man, if you heard nothing else, it's what I tell you folks about job costing, about your sales process, about your pre-construction meeting, about the final 5%, all these different areas that you're improving and working on your business. So much of it comes down to process, process, process. This is how we interview. This is how we interview. Spend some time and be thoughtful on getting that process really strong, and it really sets yourself up for success in this area of your business. And Steve, if they were needing some help with that, or if they wanted to fast track that, or if they wanted to put some get some help with that, how can they reach out to you, or how can they find you?
So my consulting company is called Sage Consulting. You can reach out to me through Kyle or Bailey. My phone number is 517-410-6692.
Wonderful. And it's saged with a D, Saged,
Correct.
or so wonderful. Saged Consulting. It almost goes back to what we talked about earlier of demonstrated. I don't just demonstrate, I demonstrate. I've been there, done that. Saged.
Absolutely.
Past tense and present. Wonderful, Steve. Thank you, my friend. That was fun. We might have to do this again sometime.
Take care, Kyle. Thank you.
All right.